Brian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. All good. All good. Phone rang just as I got on, and as always happens.
Allah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hi, everyone. Just going to give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Hey, Councillor Bach, was I the first one in here?
You were indeed, Councillor Maria.
Awesome, because I'm going to be here for the first part and then I'll be in transit. So I just wanted to see if I can get my questions in before I have to transition to the other side.
Totally. Yep. No, you'll be first in line after Matt, since he's my co-sponsor. I think we'll make it happen.
Thank you. Is Councillor Edwards the chair though? Isn't she the one?
I'm gonna have to read a letter from her. She's had to step away, so she asked me, and Councillor Flaherty couldn't make it either, so she asked me to step in with chairing today.
Okay. All right. Trying to understand the order of business here, so I know how to manage my expectations.
Yeah, it'll just be, I'll kick it off with all the front matter and a little bit of framing, and then we'll go to Matt and then you. And I don't think we won't have long presentations from the admin today, Councillor Mejia, so we should be able to get to questions pretty quickly. And then we've got a bunch of advocates who are joining us to give public testimony. I see some of them are here already. Yeah, so we're hoping to move through the councillor side of things fairly quickly so we can get to all those folks. All right. And I see we've got Councillor Braden. Check. All right. All right, I think I see that we're live on YouTube. Christine, are we good to go from your perspective?
Yes, Councillor.
Okay, great. Well, there is no time like the present. So I'm calling this hearing of the City Council's Committee on Government Operations to order. Today is Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. I'm City Councillor Kenzie Bach, and we're here today for a virtual hearing on docket 0685, an order regarding a text amendment to the Boston zoning code with respect to parking minimums for affordable housing, which was referred to the committee on May 19th, 2021. The sponsors of this docket are myself and Councillor Matt O'Malley, and the committee held a working session on the docket on June 22nd, 2021. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom, and it is being recorded. This enables the council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and live on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, or Verizon 964. It's also going to be rebroadcasted at a later date. And we will be taking public testimony today, but written comments can be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov. That's GO for government operations. So ccc.go@boston.gov. And that'll be made part of the record and available to all councilors. As I mentioned before we formally got going, I am filling in as chair today for Councillor Edwards. I want to read a letter from her into the record right now. Dear Government Operations Committee, I regret to inform you that I will be unable to attend docket 0685 in order for a hearing regarding a text amendment to the Boston zoning code with respect to parking minimums for affordable housing. I leave the committee in the capable hands of the lead sponsor, Councillor Bach. I'm confident her impartiality and fair-mindedness will result in a productive and fruitful hearing. My staff will be attending, and I will thoroughly review the video, hearing minutes, and public testimony. Sincerely, Councillor Lydia Edwards, District 1. Letter received today, and I just want to thank Councillor Edwards, although she's had to miss this at the last minute. Her staff has been very involved in all the kind of prior back and forth on the hearing and getting us all set up here, and are indeed on the call. So grateful to her for her leadership of government operations as always, and happy to pinch hit a little bit today. I also want to read a letter into the record from Boston City Councilor at Large, Michelle Wu, who isn't able to join us today, but who sent a letter, again dated October 5th. Good afternoon. I regret that I am unable to attend today's hearing on docket 0685, an order regarding a text amendment to the Boston zoning code with respect to parking minimums for affordable housing due to a previous commitment. I want to thank Councillor Bach and Councillor O'Malley for leading this effort, as well as Councillor Edwards, and voice my strong support for this important zoning amendment. Too often, rigid parking minimums have frustrated our efforts to build affordable housing, whether by opening the door to frivolous lawsuits or by increasing development costs and thereby reducing the number of units. Most recently, this flawed system has jeopardized the future of a 39-unit apartment building for low-income seniors in Jamaica Plain, delayed a nearby permanent supportive housing development for people who have experienced homelessness, and reduced the number of units of permanent supportive housing proposed in Dorchester. Safe, healthy, affordable housing is the necessary foundation for thriving families and communities. This text amendment to the Boston zoning code is a necessary first step toward addressing our housing crisis, and I look forward to continuing to work with advocates, residents, and my colleagues on the council to deliver housing justice for all. Sincerely, Michelle Wu, Boston City Councilor at Large. So thank you to both Councilors Edwards and Wu for those letters. I want to give folks a quick run of show for what our plan is here today. We're doing things slightly out of order in that our first occasion on this piece of legislation was a working session, which was very useful, but it didn't provide an opportunity for public hearing. And so this time, this is the hearing. So what we will be hearing from folks in the administration and myself and Councillor O'Malley as the co-sponsors and answering councillor questions. We're also definitely focusing today on providing a space for advocates and others to get their voices heard on this matter. And I will be trying to ensure that we move to that portion of the program by 3 o'clock at the latest, just so that we get those voices in and we don't keep people waiting. A little bit of a review of where we've been. Councillor O'Malley and I were looking conceptually at ways to help facilitate affordable housing development in the city and sort of process issues. And I would say this felt a little more theoretical back when we had a hearing order on it in early spring. And then in, I think it was mid-April, maybe early May, we had these incidents come up, specifically in Councillor O'Malley's district, where particular affordable housing was being prevented, with one of the hooks being these legal requirements for parking minimums that then provide a basis for a lawsuit, even though it's very normal for them to be waived in the development process. And we have a whole process that vets how many parking spaces a affordable development really needs. But the sort of legal technical requirement in the zoning code overrides that and creates, like I said, this legal hook. And so he and I filed this. We did have that working session back in June, and I regret to report that, even last week I was standing outside of the development, the 39 unit proposed development that Councillor Wu referenced, with many allies from Mass Senior Action, from City Life Feeder Bana, Abundant Housing, just lots of folks who know how urgently we need affordable senior housing in JP and the city at large, still not having seen forward motion on that problem that reared its head back in the spring. So I think we feel the urgency of this, and we want to figure out how to collectively get to something that the council can move forward to prevent these kinds of situations from happening in the future. What I'm going to do right now is I'll go to Councillor O'Malley and my colleagues for any opening statements. Then we'll go to the administration. We do have circulated a modified version of the legislation from the spring. The main modification was in response to the Department of Neighborhood Development made a couple of good points to us. One of them was that actually we had said this would only apply to 100% affordable developments. They came back and said, actually, we've got some community-led processes like the one that's happened around Nubian Square, where there's been a desire for some kind of community level moderate housing mixed in with the affordable, kind of a 2/3, 1/3 scenario. And we wouldn't want to preclude that. And so they suggested things that are 60% or more affordable units, which functionally any development like that gets funded through our affordable housing funding processes, and ends up again with a lot of design review. So that was a major suggestion to them from that. And I have since learned of some of the advocacy I think we'll hear from today, from folks around the Fairmont corridor pushing for relief from these parking minimums for a long time. And again, with a kind of mixed income but community focused vision that we want to make sure that anything we're doing in zoning allows for. So that's really the main modification. And I can get into that at greater detail, but I think before I go to the department, I just want to quickly give my colleagues a chance to say a word, starting with Councillor O'Malley, who I'm proud to have as a partner in this endeavor. So Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your great partnership and leadership here. I think you've set the table quite nicely. Looking forward to hearing from our colleagues in the administration, as well as more importantly, hearing from advocates and residents. Excuse me. This is something obviously I'm proud to lend my name to, proud to support, to have worked with you. While the impetus, can't be pinpointed to one specific project, twice now we've seen in my district 2 100% affordable housing developments, one for formerly homeless individuals, the other for seniors, that were probably the 2 least controversial projects that my district has seen in 11 years. There was broad-based community support, and in this case, the same individual, in my opinion, is using the parking minimum as a weapon when it's not an appropriate use. So I think it really begs the questions that certainly we need to be doing more to encourage and develop 100% affordable. I understand that, we're taking D&D's lead on maybe modifying the language to other, because there are some other examples, but clearly this is not for all new development. This is not for all new projects. I think there was some concern raised on the council floor from some colleagues. So I hope we can clear some of that up through this conversation. This would apply to a very small universe of projects, but desperately needed projects nevertheless. So I'm excited again to continue this conversation to get this done, and really look forward to the great partnership with you and the leadership that we've seen. So thank you and look forward to a good hearing.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor O'Malley. Yeah, and strongly agree. I think it is important to emphasize this is about affordable projects. And that I think it's also important to clarify that this is in no way a parking ban. I think we'll hear from Jessica and others about the fact that these projects go through a process, but that this is about removing that requirement that creates the legal hook. I want to go next to Councillor Mejia. And Councillor Mejia, I know you have a time constraint, so if there's any questions you want to get on the record in the opening statement, I'll definitely allow that. And then go to Councillor Arroyo and Councillor Braden. So Councillor Mejia at large, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and to the lead sponsors for introducing this text amendment. We've seen how parking minimums have been used as a tool to oppose the development of low-income housing here in our city. As our housing crisis continues to get worse, with more and more people getting kicked out of our city every day, we need to be doing everything in our power to be building more affordable housing across the city in every neighborhood, particularly our most transit accessible neighborhoods. You know, as someone who bounced from place to place, I didn't have my own room until I was in the 5th grade. So I understand this from a deep personal space of how important it is for us to have affordable housing for all. And I look forward to this conversation and learning more. And then I only have 2 questions. The goal of this ordinance, at least in part, is to eliminate unnecessary roadblocks put in place by people trying to stop low-income housing developments on the basis of parking. Parking minimums were a tool for them to stop these developments. My question is, once this ordinance passes, what is the next tool that they are going to use to oppose dense affordable housing? And how are we thinking one step ahead of the people out here who are opposing housing for low-income communities?
Great, thank you, Councillor Mejia. I think that's a really important question. And Councillor O'Malley and I, like I said, we picked off this piece because we were seeing it so specifically and urgently, but I think that broader conversation is really important. So I will in a minute, when we turn to the administration, ask Jessica and others just to speak to that a little bit. I'll finish running through councillors first. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you and Matt O'Malley for moving forward with this. I support this fully. For me, there's no issue more urgent in the city of Boston than housing. We're seeing it in the census numbers. We're seeing it in the way that our city is changing demographically. We understand that this is an expensive city to live in, that this is a difficult city to make ends meet if you do not make a certain income. And if we're not building affordable housing, if we're not doing everything we can to ease the purchase and building of affordable housing, then I don't think we're meeting the moment. This here does that. I think this attempts to make it easier for the development of and the creation of affordable housing, which ultimately, as an end result, means the creation of homes where people live. And for me, if we're going to be debating parking and a home where somebody lives, I'm always going to back where somebody lives. And so I appreciate the work on this. I appreciate folks who come at this from a different angle, but that's where I am. And so I look forward to a robust hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks so much, Councillor Arroyo. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really look forward to this conversation and to hearing from the advocates and also from the administration. There's lots of things to say about the development of affordable housing and how challenging it is. And paired with the issue, and this is more of just a statement, paired with the issue of parking for low-income housing, we also have to be very, very diligent. And I know you're a strong advocate for improvements in our public transit system, because that's what our folks who live in our low-income housing rely incredibly on an efficient and affordable public transit system. So I think all of these things go together, and I think it's really behooves us to plan diligently for how all these necessary services come together to support all of our residents in the city. So I really look forward to the conversation. I really look forward to having some of my previous concerns that I voiced at City Council some time ago, have those addressed, to get a better understanding of what we're talking about. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Councillor Braden. All right, and I think I want to now acknowledge, recognize, and turn to the administration who's joined us. So representing the Department of Neighborhood Development, we've got Tim Davis, the Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research, and Jessica Boatwright, the Deputy Director for the Neighborhood Housing Development. We're joined on the BPDA side by Brian Glasscock, Deputy Director for Regulatory Planning and Zoning, and at BTD from Vineet Gupta, the Director of Planning, and also Ala Mukal, who's a planner in the New Mobility team. And I'll let her speak to it, but just one of the things that also happened since we had our last working session on this is that the city's taken some steps in its sort of design review process at BPDA to try to shift some of these minimums to make it easier and smooth the way. I think one of the things that I can say, personifying Councillor Edwards for a moment, is that this council is very interested in making sure that, things that we think should change on our regulatory front actually get changed in zoning, and not only at the kind of policy department level, in part because of the kind of specious challenges that we see when we don't do that. So I think, that's it's nice to be rowing in the same direction with the departments, but we still have an interest as a council in thinking about the legal zoning language. Before I go to the administration, I see we've just been joined by Councillor Ed Flynn of District 2. Councillor Flynn, we were just wrapping up opening statements. Did you want to say a word?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Councilor Block. Thank you to the panelists for the exceptional work that they're doing in the city. Thank you, Councilor Block.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn. So with that, I think, as I said before, the only main change to the language as proposed right now is that the Department of Neighborhood Development had asked us to define affordable projects in such a way that would enable kind of the whole sweep of projects that they deal with to fall into it. And so we tweaked that a bit. But I think I would love if the department would speak to that a little bit. And also, I know that one of the issues that came up before was, to Councillor Braden's point, sort of the question of how projects do get reviewed for the parking that they might need, depending on the population that's living there and the car needs. And so I think you spoke to that a little bit before, Jessica, but it would probably be good to go back there. And so I think I'll just go to the departments for comments on the language as it stands right now that's before the committee. And then I'll ask councilors if they have any questions for the departments while we've got them here. And again, just reminding everybody that we do have a bunch of folks who are going to testify, and so I'll be wanting to get to them as soon as we can. So Jessica or Tim, is one of you? Tim, want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the co-sponsors, Councilors Bach and O'Malley, for holding this hearing today. And thank you, Councilors Mejia, Braden, Arroyo, and Flynn, for your attendance and interest in this topic. I'm Tim Davis, Deputy Director for Policy Development and Research for the Department of Neighborhood Development. We here at DND are in favor of efforts that would make it easier for income-restricted housing projects to be built with less zoning risk. We are in support of the changes to the zoning amendment, to the proposed amendment, to make sure that we are covering a broad range of projects. And we fund projects that are at least 40% income restricted. And these projects, and the requirement here is at least 60%. We believe that this will cover the bulk of the projects that we support. While this zoning amendment would create no minimum parking requirements, DND is committed to assuring that DND funded affordable housing projects have sufficient parking to meet the needs of residents. Based on the actual usage patterns in existing affordable properties, the populations to be served by the project, the proximity to transit, and citywide maximum parking guidelines being established by the Boston Transportation Department. These decisions are made as part of the DND design and funding process and through the BPD Article 80 review process. Further, we are looking at new policies that will make sure that where we do have a limited number of parking spaces, those parking spaces are distributed to tenants and residents in an equitable and fair manner. I look forward to hearing testimony of those in the community interested in this topic. And Jessica Boatwright, our Deputy Director for Neighborhood Housing Development, and I are here for any questions you may have. At the moment, though, I'll turn it over to Brian Glasscock, for him to do his introduction, but also I think to answer that question about continued zoning risk even after this zoning amendment is passed. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And thanks, Councillor Bach and Councillor O'Malley and the makers of this proposed zoning amendment, and to all the councillors who are here today to talk about this really sometimes vexing issue of how much parking is right. And as this hasn't not yet gone to our the BPDA board, we aren't able to express an opinion one way or the other on it. So I'm mostly here today to try and help with some of the technical aspects of zoning amendments. The issue that Tim mentioned that Councillor Mejia brought up in her somewhat dark question of what's the next thing that people are going to use to try and stop affordable housing development. I think the short answer is in anything they can. There are people that will fight things for a variety of reasons, some better than others, and some really pretty cynical. And anything that needs zoning relief, it has the potential of getting delayed or derailed completely by people withstanding, meaning direct abutters or abutters who are being disproportionately affected by a particular development, who can get to court and challenge the city's grant through the ZBA of zoning relief. And so it's a little bit of a question of like whack-a-mole, what's the next thing? But sort of broadly speaking, we need to be crafting affordable housing development projects that can be otherwise done as of right. There are going to be some that are currently tripped up by the need for the off-street parking. And I think this proposal is a way of addressing it. And I'll go on the record along with my colleagues and many others to again point out that it doesn't say that there will be no parking, no off-street parking. What it says is that you're not going to be held to some standard that is maybe not necessary for the particular project. And given that most of these projects that are 60% or more affordable are going to either be getting some degree of some level of public funding or being reviewed in some other way, I'm very confident that in the case of D&D projects, for instance, they'll be working to right size the off-street parking supply. And so I again remind people that it doesn't mean there won't be any off-street parking. It means that it won't be held to an artificial standard that's really applicable to some other types of developments. So the only other comments I'd have at this time are that I did talk with Councillor Bach. I worked with one of your staff members to sort of walk through some of the updates that have been made, in particular adding some sections of the zoning code, different neighborhoods at sub-districts to make sure that we cover them all. I haven't had a chance to go through it with a fine-tooth comb because there are so many, but I want to make sure that we get the numerical language correct to make sure that we touch all the bases. So we'll be doing that over the coming weeks with our staff and working with yours to make sure that that we've got all the neighborhood sub-districts that are appropriate. And that's all I have for now. I'm here to listen and answer questions if I can.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. And yes, I failed to say that the legislation has a list of zoning articles, and the BPDA through you has been quite helpful in helping us update that list. And we definitely will continue to work with you to make sure that it's 100% updated, because as everyone knows, our zoning code is very complicated and we're not trying to create more artifacts in it by leaving some article out. So appreciate that. Vineet and Ala, did you guys want to say a word from the Transportation Department's perspective?
I can speak very briefly. So while I'm Vineet Gupta, I'm the planning director at the Boston Transportation Department, and I'm joined with Allah Mokahal, who's one of our planners here at BTD, and is very closely involved with developing parking policy. While this initiative is led by D&D and the BPDA, the Transportation Department is supportive of this legislation. We think that affordable housing should not be constrained by minimum parking ratios or minimum parking requirements, some of which are outdated in today's world. So that's one piece. The second piece is, and Brian mentioned this, that we have full confidence in the public process that comes hand in hand with most development projects. And so we think through that conversation, the right amount of parking would be provided for affordable housing, frankly, for any new development. The third piece is that, and we don't need to go into details here, it's a conversation for another time. Allah and I have been working to really kind of rethink our parking policy in general, particularly with the introduction of maximums. But that's another conversation. And we are here to answer any questions. And Allah, if you'd like to add something, please feel free.
Thank you, Vineet. And thank you, Councillor Bach, for having us over. I just want to reiterate what Vineet said. We're very much supportive of removing parking minimums, ultimately setting parking requirements costs developments more, and that cost ends up being passed on to tenants. And so I think this is a good thing, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much. And I guess just one question from me, Jessica, if you could speak a little bit to, because I want to make sure folks understand just, I think what a couple of people have referenced is the fact that pretty much any, I think, I can't think of one that this isn't true for, any affordable housing development that's got 60% or more units as affordable, frankly, whatever level of affordability they're at, just because the funding gaps inherent in such things is going to go through like a D&D process. And what we mean by that, right, is that they're going to be coming to you for funding to close that gap. And so it means that you guys have sign off on their plans. And so that's what we mean when we say there's going to be a review that goes through, you know, what parking's adequate for that site and everything. But I wondered if you could just speak to that a little bit more, because I think it's important for people to understand that distinction, that the city has review powers over general developments based on Article 80 over on Brian's side with BPDA, but that there's an additional level of scrutiny when there's city money going into a project. So just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So, so in order for an affordable housing development project to qualify for our funds, which, as Councillor Bach, as you just said, you know, pretty much if there's a project that that has 60% affordable, they're going to need our funds to fill the gap to make the project feasible. They come into us through an annual funding competition. And one of the baseline requirements for an award of funding is that they can demonstrate community support at the time of application. So we're looking for letters, both from elected officials and also community groups, to understand what kind of outreach the project has done to the neighborhood, and more specifically to understand what kind of feedback the neighborhood has given to the project. So once they come in that way, if they're successful in getting an award, our team is going to partner with them to move through the pre-development process, which includes communication through an iterative process with the neighborhood, as well as a design review that we do that's coordinated with the BPDA review. So both, then you have both City of Boston D&D and BPDA working together to look at issues such as, how does this fit into the neighborhood context? What are the specific needs for a project in this neighborhood in terms of a multitude of issues, of which, of course, parking is often a central issue in those conversations. So we're very, very engaged in making sure that there's a constant feedback loop with the neighborhood on any project that we're funding. And I think that that's the process that both Tim and Brian were referring to when we talk about how, you know, even with this, but the proposed change, there would still be a very structured process for community feedback and for thought about what the requirements might be for that project, that location in that neighborhood.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to go to colleagues for questions now. And just a reminder, if you're here to testify, I see you. We've got folks in a queue, and as soon as we get through councillor questions, we will be going to public testimony. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will be brief so we can get to public testimony. I think you've sort of explained some of the things, and I'm sorry, I was checking something, so you may have said this, but Brian or Jessica, do you know, or Tim, do you know how many parcels currently would come under what this sort of it would be in this universe, or not parcels, I'm sorry, projects, potential projects?
We would have to do a little quick research. I can probably pull that up, but it may take a few minutes.
Okay, if maybe, yeah. And even sort of a ballpark guess, because I think the sort of stumbling block for some is that this would be, you know, every potential project down the pike would come under this, and then it would sort of shift the onus. But it's my understanding there would be a much smaller sort of universe that we'd be looking at, and obviously it's a very high level or criteria that you'd have to then meet for this relief. So yeah, maybe if we could get that number, you know, by the even as we continue to sort of cycle through questions.
Yeah,
Brian, did you?
I can do that while you're asking other questions.
Thank you, Tim. I miss your bookshelf behind you, Tim. That was such a nice part of all of our Zoom meetings. So good to see you back in the building or back in the office. So that's basically my only question. I'm happy to defer to other colleagues before we get into public testimony, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I've lost, there we go, I've lost the window for a second there. Let me go next to Councillor Mejia.
Yeah, I think the question that I asked, I think in the opening remarks, someone kind of addressed it. So thank you for that. I'm good.
Okay, great.
I believe.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Arroyo?
I am also good. Thank you.
And Councillor Braid.
It looks like I'm also good. This is, I think that the comments of our colleagues have clarified some of my questions already. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And yes, I should acknowledge that a number of the people here came to the working session in June and asked their questions then. So we appreciate you all. And before I jump into the public testimony, I just want to, just so that everybody kind of sees it, 1 second. Do you guys, sorry, I thought I was going to share my screen, but now, here we go. So do folks see my screen right now? Someone?
Yeah, we got
yes, I see it.
Perfect. So this is what was originally filed by myself and Councillor O'Malley. And again, folks have this, but I just want people to know this was the footnote that was being added, and we adjusted it so that it would, so that we would define affordable residential housing with that 60% number. And I should say, I think I mentioned this when we originally filed it, but it was funny because when we went to look for somewhere to put a footnote like this, we actually found a footnote in the existing zoning code that was put in to try to exempt residential senior affordable housing from parking requirements, like to make them much reduced many years ago, but unfortunately used outdated definitions from the earlier days of HUD, and so it doesn't really apply to many things today. But it's just a reminder that in some ways everything old is new again, and we're dealing with some sort of constant challenges when it comes to fighting for affordability in the city of Boston. And then these are some of the districts that BPDA helped identify as not having been there originally, and this is the same footnote repeated again to apply in the tables of those districts. So just so that people see the, for folks at home who might not have the document, that's the latest state of affairs. So I think with that, unless it sounds like councilors are all set, did anybody else in the departments want to get a word in edgewise on anything before I jump to some of the testimony that we have here? All right, seeing none, I'm going to start letting folks in.
I can partially answer the question
yeah.
from earlier. We permitted, I mean, it went into construction in 2019, 2020, and through most of 2021, 46 projects that were 60% affordable or higher. And of those, almost all were 100% affordable, except for a few.
And can I just ask, were parking, of those 46, how many received some or total parking parking requirement relief?
This data would not have that. My data set does not have what they were given.
Fair enough. I would it be a correct guess to say that most would receive at least some relief from the parking requirements?
At least some relief.
Partial relief.
At least some relief, yes. At least some relief, yes. In part because, I mean, even most market rate projects are seeking some relief from the parking requirements as well, which speaks to the long-term need to change our parking requirements overall.
Good. Would it be too much of an inconvenience to ask, perhaps before we vote on it, some sort of clarity on that, on those projects? Because again, the reason I'm asking this is because I think it's an important tool to use going forward. And I think we're largely doing it on many of these projects before. So I want to sort of give some counselors and some folks who may have some trepidation about this, the ease of mind. So I guess, Tim, I don't know if it would be through you or Jeff Hampton or whomever.
I think I would have to ask my compatriots here whether we would be able to pull that together, because I'm not sure where it is in the documents that lists the parking requirements for each and every one, because it may be a matter of doing a project by project search to get that data.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here, but maybe if there's a way we can all put our heads together. Even I'm thinking talking to some of the counselors and our staffs may know, just having gone through the process on these things. So
okay.
That's helpful. Thank you, Kenzie.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will recognize Jeff Hampton might have an answer to that. I saw that he raised his hand.
Yes, thank you, counselors. I appreciate the time, and I'm sorry that I'm late. Councillor O'Malley, when you're speaking about the off-street parking requirements, and I'm in agreement that we can work on something in the zoning code, are you looking for just zoning variances, or the zoning relief in entirety? Was it included in a list of zoning, or was it parking only?
Just parking only, Jeff. No, thank you. That's a good clarification. I mean, I would assume that of these 46 projects that would come under sort of potentially receiving this relief, that probably all of them, or at least nearly all of them, have a drastically reduced number of parking for the units and are well under, have received some variances to address that. So rather than going through all the zoning variances, if there was a way we could even, have sort of look at some of the larger projects to see what parking actually was permitted with these 60% plus affordable units, if that's possible.
Yeah, I can work with Tim on this, and if I get a listing of the projects that were permitted, I can look it up and find out what the zoning violations were and whether or not off-street parking was a violation or even the only violation.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you. That's helpful, Jeff. Thanks, Kenzie. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Jeff, that would be great. And I do know, I'm going to read it into the record later after the people who are here to live testify, but we did receive written testimony for this hearing from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, specifically around the fact that they've done a bunch of studies of affordable developments in the region, and then also specifically in Boston, and found that the parking even that is getting built is going significantly underutilized. And so that additional cost that was alluded to earlier is sort of not being used. And then, we think about more apartments for low income folks that could have been built. And I think, one of the things that I said at the start of all this is we know that there's no solution to the city's housing needs without adding more affordable units specifically. And we know that there's no solution to the city's environmental needs. And it's off topic, but I just want to give another shout out to Councillor O'Malley, because we just signed the Birdo legislation today, which is a big piece of solving our environmental needs. But another one is this orientation away from cars. And so this does feel like a opportunity to bring those two things together when you talk about two of the real crises that the city is facing right now. All right, I think any other questions from any councilors? Because if not, all right, great. I'm going to jump over to public testimony. I said before that everything old is new again, and I just want to stress that while this technical piece of legislation was filed this year, there are a number of folks in the city who have been working really hard on the issue of how to get more affordable housing generally, and then specifically in neighborhoods, what the barriers are to it for quite a long time. And so we're excited today to be joined by some of them. I think we're going to be starting with Marvin Martin from Action for Equity, and then Edna Pruce from who's the president of the Mass Senior Action State Council, and then just the folks I see who are on my list who I see here. I see Jared from Transit Matters, Joanne Paul also from Mass Senior Action, Mark Abunia, Stacey Thompson from Livable Streets, Richard Giordano from Fenway CDC. Oh, sorry, I missed Tilly Teixeira, also Mass Senior Action, and Lori Radwin. So I will be letting everybody in, and we will run through and hear public testimony on this. But want to start out with Marvin Martin. And Marvin, thank you so much for joining us today and waiting patiently, and for all your prior work on this. I think it would be great if you could give the council some sense of that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Bach and O'Malley for hosting this. I just want to go on the record. My name is Marvin Martin, resident of Dorchester and with Action for Equity. And we are in support of docket number 0685. Of course, somebody might recall me since I start speaking. Sorry about that. You know, we on favor of actually, you know, removing any obstacles or barriers to the creation of affordable housing. We do a lot of work in the Fairmount corridor, which is the home to actually the largest population of people of color and low and a lot of low and moderate income families that's there as well. One of the things that we've been working on that's relevant to this is we created a special protection zone. We've been working with the city on this for some time now. I see, you know, Tim Davis and Brian Glascott and even Benit have been part of this at different times. But we, with the city, we decided to create a pilot project that we need to, you know, continue to make it happen, but to look at a couple of development sites and have them built without parking, and in trade for deeper affordability, or in some cases, if there was no affordability included originally, to put some affordability in there. And you know, it's a trade-off with the cost of building parking lot, as you mentioned before. And we will also be asking that the developer or the owner actually put in some alternative transportation modes, whether it's biking racks, discount Charlie cards, share riding, some other way that people can get around. Now, fortunately, most of the Fairmount corridor is a TOD area, so transportation, it's not a transportation desert like it used to be. Thanks to the new stops on the Fairmount line. The other thing, though, is I think it's a little different is that we're looking at, and this is not every development. So just to be clear, it's not every development, but, you know, certain developments where, you know, where the community and the developer can come together on this, is even if it's market rate, Because again, we are, and Councilor Bach, you were about to transition into this in your last statements. Action's also an environmental justice organization. So getting cars off the street is in our interest as well. So, so we actually have two things here. One is to create affordability, but also some environmental justice that we would like to see happen. So again, we are in favor of this. We need to continue to work on the special protection zone. I think, you know, this piece, that this pilot project that we're working on with the city will happen. And that could maybe set a precedent for other projects in the city as we move forward. And thank you for giving me a minute to speak.
Thank you so much, Marvin. Going next to Ms. Edna Bruce from Mass Senior Action. And then I'm trying to get your colleagues from Mass Senior Action over. So Christine, if you can try to move Tilly Ruth and Joanne over. For some reason, I'm having trouble with it. But Ms. Bruce, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Councillor Bach and Councillor O'Malley. I am Edna Bruce. I'm a resident of Mattapan and the president of the Mass Senior Action Council. We are a statewide organization led by seniors. We have 6 chapters across the state, with Boston being our largest chapter. We work collectively to improve the lives of seniors and our communities across the Commonwealth. I'm here today to ask the committee and the City Council to support Docket 0685 to amend the minimum parking requirements for affordable housing. The reason this amendment is necessary is the current zoning code is being used to stop greatly needed affordable housing units. A 2019 University of Massachusetts study reported 6 in 10 Massachusetts seniors do not have the income to make ends meet. Massachusetts ranks 50th for senior economic security. This means we're at the bottom of the barrel. The entire other 49 states created policies to ease the burdens for seniors, while Massachusetts continues to widen the economic gap for elders. I would like to emphasize again, we are 50th in the United States, below Mississippi, which I think is the biggest insult of all. One of the main causes for this disparity is the cost of housing. I do not have to tell you affordable housing is needed. We know of seniors who have been on a waiting list for an affordable apartment for years. You will hear from a few of these today. The Boston Housing Authority website states a person could wait up to 10 years for a unit. This brings us to the amendment at hand. While we all know housing is needed, a proposal for 38 affordable housing units for seniors is tied up in court by a landlord who is using the outdated parking requirement to block the housing, using the minimum parking requirement as his weapon. This same landlord has used the parking requirement before to stop needed housing, tying up the building process while the waiting list for Boston seniors continues to grow. Land developers are able to file a lawsuit, tie up the process to cost the city and nonprofit developer tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, while Boston is fighting homelessness and our shelters are steadily at capacity. The housing being blocked with the outdated parking requirement could save the life of a senior on the waiting list. or one couch surfing with less than welcoming family, or one in a shelter trying to stay safe. Passing this amendment will save the city legal fees, allow the type of housing needed to be developed, and put a stop to this type of land grab tactics. Thank you very much for hearing my testimony today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Edna, for that powerful testimony. And I think it was clear seeing you and all the senior action folks out. What a force you are to be reckoned with, but also, like you say, you know, we know our seniors are strong when they stand together, but we also know that they're vulnerable when we don't have housing to provide them. So really appreciate you. And next up, going to Joanne Paul, and then I think we just got, oh, okay. I had Tilly Ruth here for a second. She's gone again, but hopefully I'll have her back in a sec. Joanne?
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. My name is Joanne Paul. I would like to request that you pass docket number 0685. Affordable housing is a basic human right. I understand the importance of having a place to call home. In 2013, I separated from my husband and divorced him. Unable to pay market rate rent on my own in Boston, I became homeless. So I went into the homeless shelter system. I applied for affordable housing in Section 8 through Boston Housing, Metropolitan Housing, and HUD. All three government agencies told me that I would probably get an apartment in 10 to 15 years, as they had a backlog for affordable housing and Section 8 certificates. It's hard to find affordable housing when most buildings are either expensive condos or luxury apartments, starting at $2,000 plus a month. Who can afford $2,000 plus a month? Not me, that's for sure. I am thankful that I was able to stay in the homeless shelters, but being homeless takes a toll on your mental and physical health. You have to deal with your own physical and mental issues, but also with other homeless people's mental, physical, and opioid addictions. In addition, carrying your personal belongings around all day takes a toll on your body, as we are not allowed to store our belongings at the shelter due to limited space. Being homeless is stressful. You are not guaranteed a bed every day. You must be at the shelter at 4 p.m. every day to get in line just to get a bed lottery ticket. Also, you are not guaranteed a bed every day, regardless if you are a senior citizen, handicapped, vision impaired, hearing impaired, a veteran, pregnant, or have any other special challenges and needs. You pray that your number is called. If your bed lottery ticket is not called, you must leave that shelter and go to another shelter to try to get a bed there. Every day, you must leave the shelter at 8 a.m., regardless of the weather conditions, rain, sleet, snow, or heat, and even on the weekends. As a person with rheumatoid arthritis, there were days when I did not want to get up out of bed, as my body was achy and stiff. So I can relate to the aches and pains that many of the senior citizens, the handicapped, veterans, and others experience on a daily basis in the shelter. Everyone has a basic human right to housing, food, and health care. Please pass docket number 685 and do not deny senior citizens their rights to live in these 38 affordable units. I finally got my Section 8 certificate, an affordable apartment, after 8 long years in the homeless shelter system. To quote Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, there is no place like home. There is no place like home. There is no place like home. And thank you for listening to me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Joanne, again, for that powerful testimony and just reminder of what it actually means for people to be living in shelter and not with a home. So I really appreciate you being here with us. I see I've got Tilly. Tilly, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to say that I feel very fortunate that where I live is affordable. We made it a very interesting project of city, federal, and work by the homeowners, okay? But with that, I am a senior, and then the question of parking is, well, I have to say I had to give up my car. Parking is 2 problems. One is the question of being able to afford a car in the city of Boston. That's one. But then the other, a lot of seniors cannot drive. So when you're planning the number of parking spaces for senior residents, I don't think you do figure a 1-on-1 or a 2-for-1. You do not need a huge number of spaces. And I feel that the urgent need is for affordable housing. How do you say? I had grandkids live with me because they could not afford to get housing on their own, stay. And that continues. I'm expecting a young cousin to come and stay with me for a few months while she moves to Boston and is able to find housing. It's a problem, and affordable housing is, I guess, number one, maybe after that of education on the list of Boston municipal problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tilly. Really appreciate you as well, the whole Mass Senior Action group. Next up, we're going to Jared Johnson from Transit Matters, then Stacey Thompson from Livable Streets. And then I've also got, again, Mark Ibunya, Laurel Radwin, and Rich Giordano on my list as well. Jared, you have the floor. Jared? Can people hear me? Is it Jared who's frozen?
I'm good now. I realized I was on the wrong Wi-Fi. Should be good to go now.
Okay, great.
Hello. Thank you, Councillor Bach, Councillor O'Malley, and all the other councillors and staff who are here. My name is, again, Jared Johnson with Transit Matters, and I'm also a board member of Abundant Housing. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to testify today, and I just want to echo the powerful testimony from the folks Mass Senior Action and from Marvin Martin. And I also want to take a moment to recognize the remarkable work that the city of Boston has done on transportation, from the first center running bus lanes in the region, the expansion of the Blue Bikes network, protected bike lanes on dangerous roads like Com Ave, and pushing for the Fairmount Line pilot. And a lot of that is because of, with the support of counselors like you. But one area where Boston is really falling behind and really gets a failing grade is on parking. America's walking city is behind not only Somerville and Cambridge, but Buffalo, Austin, Los Angeles, and others. And really what this shows us is that it's not about waiting until we have the perfect transit system in order to make these reforms. If you look at the combined population of Buffalo, Austin, and Minneapolis, it's about 40% larger than the Boston metro area. And between them, they have 4 dinky, low capacity, green line style light rail lines. So this is not about waiting until we have fixed every issue at the T. What the transportation director at the city of Somerville, Brad Rawson, always says that building massive amount of parking undervalues the city's investment. So all of those great accomplishments that I mentioned earlier are undervalued when there is massive amounts of parking built, especially when it's built near transit. I've heard concerns about a lack of parking, leading to traffic. But the problem is that the data just doesn't bear that out. The MAPC parking study for the region found that upwards of 30% of parking spaces are vacant at night during the peak hours. And there's just simply no proof that building parking is green. In fact, there's plenty of proof of the opposite between the urban heat island effect, which disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities and has, additional concerns with toxic runoff entering our water streams and increased flooding because of impermeable surfaces. That certainly isn't green. Also, when we look at the amount of resources that have to go into concrete, it's one of the most energy intensive processes out there. And so forcing every development to have either impermeable pavement or to have resource intensive concrete for structured parking simply isn't green. And I'll close with saying this, that transit won't get better. The cycling numbers won't increase, and walking won't get any safer if we continue to prioritize parking spots and curb cuts ahead of the climate, ahead of people's safety. And so I urge the council to take this small step to make, not only, as the speakers before me have alluded to, not only, prioritize the needs of low-income folks and seniors to have housing, but ahead of our climate, and really start to shift Boston in the direction of back to being a climate leader and back to being a leader in moving people around and not cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Next up, Stacy, then Mark, then Lori. Stacy Thompson.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Bach, Councillor O'Malley, and everyone who's here today. I'm Stacy Thompson at Livable Streets Alliance, and I'm also here to testify in support of Docket 0685. As many of you know, my favorite topic to talk to the council about is parking. So this is my dream hearing. And I want to echo some of what Jared said, and I, dug in and did some research this morning, and I would say this is actually a very modest, tangible step compared to what other major metropolitan areas are doing around the country. Just to illuminate that, both Minneapolis and St. Paul voted to eliminate parking minimums across the board, which is something that Marvin started with. This is focusing on affordable housing, again, is a really important step for the city. Many other cities are going much further and already have. And Raleigh, North Carolina is my most favorite recent example. In June, the council there voted almost unanimously to begin the process of removing parking minimums and also changing the parking maximums to really reduce this. And if you're curious, they have a paltry bus system and they do charge for residential parking. So it's, when you compare Boston to Raleigh, North Carolina, they are actually have more progressive zoning for senior and affordable housing than the city of Boston does right now. So, from our perspective, I think we're really supportive of taking this great first short-term step, something that I think is hopefully very achievable before the end of the year as a down payment or promise to continue the conversation, particularly around the special protection zones that Marvin mentioned that Action for Equity has been leading on for years, and many other bigger reforms and interventions that we know the city of Boston needs. I see this as a really important first step, and we're excited to support it and provide you with any data points or examples that are needed in order to advance this important initiative. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Stacy. Mark, and then Lori, and then it'll be Rich. Mark,
Yep.
see you.
There we go. Good afternoon.
There we are. Now we do. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Ibunya. I'm a resident at 225 Center Street at the very tippy top of Councillor O'Malley's district. So thank you very much for all of the voices before me, inspiring and wonderful accounts of how this really has a serious impact on people's lives. We need to put people and homes before cars. So I highly recommend the council committee approve the text amendment before you. I would push as Stacy, as Jared, and as many others before me have said, that this really should just be the beginning. I would push for us to consider the elimination of parking requirements for all income restricted housing for all developments, as mentioned by Marvin before. Parking has become a wedge for community opposition to any development. I've been on several impact advisory groups for the city of for developments near me at Jackson Square, and I'm also watching that several of these conflicts happen before my eyes down on Washington Street, south of Eggleston, as I'm literally watching outside my window, watching BTD and MBTA put the finishing touches on the Columbus Avenue bus lane, doing all of these things to actually make investments to address the issue of mobility around our city that a lot of the opponents say that we need this parking for. While I acknowledge that our city and region is still actively working to improve non-automotive mobility with investments and strengthening partnerships, land use still plays a significant part of this, and my building is guilty of that as well. I have 103 units in my building, and my building manager can literally right next to Jackson Square Station and one of the highest frequency bus corridors in the city, connecting many points far south as Ashmont and Mattapan, and yet our building manager can barely find people to rent the 103 units in our building. But also, you know, my unit is a testament to the fact that if you build it, they will come. I live with somebody in our building who works in a nearby neighborhood and willingly pays the $125 rent to park there. And so, you know, I think we really need to take a second look at this. We need to really push ourselves, and we should not be letting other you know, cities really lead us on this. We have an opportunity to be a leader in this space. So I think we should move forward definitely with these amendments. And as Stacy has said, we can definitely do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Next up, Lori Radwin, and then Rich Giordano. Lori?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Lori Radwin. I live in Roslindale, and I just resonate with people's experiences of being homeless. For a time, I was at Boston Medical Center on the cancer unit. We gave tons of horribly devastating chemotherapy and discharged people to the streets. So it's despicable. And I am lifting up anything that will increase the amount of affordable housing. My question is about what makes something affordable. And we know that 70% AMI is not affordable. And we've had lots of, I've learned a lot from all of you about what real people need for affordable housing. So one of the things I suggest in this docket is define affordable housing as that which people making the median income of a Black family, a Latinx family, or minimum wage. That's what's affordable. And you can't get mixed up between, you know, the need for parking and affordability without clarifying that explicitly. The other thing is, I was really excited to hear about the DND's remarks about community input. And I certainly hope that their process of community input is very different than the BPDA's process, because that has failed a lot of us. And, you know, if there really will be an assessment of the real needs of people in a specific community, then I'm all for it. But unless we have the reassurance, just like
Lori, you just started going in and out a little bit. Maybe.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We had you until like the last sentence, so.
I probably swallowed or something. So anyway, if assurances about true affordability can be folded into this docket, if assurances about truly listening to a community can be folded into this docket, it could be a wonderful piece of work. It will not eliminate frivolous lawsuits. And I think that point was made really clearly in the working session that I listened to, and actually listened to it more than once. And I also heard the argument that individual communities have different needs. So you can do a parking census across the city, but it's not necessarily a the parking metrics that you want for individual communities. And the CDC person from JP talked about the fact that her families need cars because their childcare situation and their workplace are in completely different parts of the city. So thank you for listening to me. I've learned a lot from this hearing. I learned a lot from the working session, and I think you can make this a more robust ordinance to really have it do its job. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Lori, and for being on both of these. Just one quick comment on that. I agree with you about the need for sort of a robust community process. And I think what we find is that these one size fits all lines in the zoning code don't really do that very well. So I agree with you that, you know, you need D&D really in the mix there to make that happen. And I think the challenge we face with to your point about the affordability, I'm a big proponent of more deeply affordable units. And actually, I think I've been pushing us to build more of our public housing units that the city of Boston is entitled to, because those are those deeply affordable 30% AMI or less. But many projects where you can get deep affordability like that, the only way you're doing it is by also having some units that are at that moderate affordability income. Like even if you're like, it's an affordable project, we're trying to have as much deep affordability as possible, there is some cross subsidizing that happens. So I think the one key thing we want is to make sure that we don't with the language in the zoning code, which we can't change too often. And that's part of what we struggled with here, that we don't make it so specific that we limit our ability to do some of the stuff like what they've been trying with those special displacement zones in Fairmont. So I think that's the challenge with how to frame it.
Right, but if every unit is at 70% or higher, it's not, just like you said, you got to have some moderate, but not every unit. So thank you for allowing me to respond to you. I know it's not a dialogue, and I appreciate your listening and your response.
Hey, whenever we
you.
can make it a dialogue, thanks. It's what I'm here for. All right, going next to Rich Giordano from the Fenway CDC, which I think was recently, I don't know if this is right, Rich, but I think you guys recently received from the state like their first award for a no parking on site affordable housing project, but I could be wrong, but I'll let you toot your own horn about that.
No, I think you got it exactly right, Councilor. For the record, my name is Richard Giordano. I'm the Director of Policy and Community Planning at Fenway CDC. And I want to thank Councilors Bach and O'Malley for sponsoring this motion or order, and for the opportunity to testify today. I'm also in awe of many of the really good points that so many people have already made. So I'm just going to skip. I submitted written testimony, and I'll jump down just to a couple of other points and won't go on forever here. A reminder too that parking requirements cost tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the conditions and the situation. They could be anywhere from 5,000 or 10,000 of surface space to 25,000 and more for underground parking. And when you add that into the total development costs of affordable housing, you have to keep in mind the fact that an affordable housing developer is not allowed to increase their total development costs because they got to do more parking. They have to keep the whole project within limits set by all of the various subsidy systems that contribute to this. So the city and the state will tell you, you can only have a total cost of, X, 500, 550,000 a unit. If your parking costs you more money, then maybe you have to do less units in order to bring your costs down. So parking spaces actually mean that you can do less affordable housing. That's one thing to keep in mind. There is no way to ask for more subsidies so that we can do the parking that we might be required. The other thing that the council brought up about the sort of the project that we've got going, we finally got approval for a 27-unit, all affordable, deeply affordable development next door to us on a parking lot previously owned by a for-profit developer who wanted to put 37 units of studios there. We got approved for no parking because it's in the Fenway, and the BRA and the city understand that there's no place to put cars, that you can't have cars in the Fenway, and that if we were to build on this spot, excavating for parking would have been exorbitantly expensive, and that therefore, we shouldn't have to do parking. And fortunately, we did a lot of community outreach and work, and all of our abutters and our neighbors supported us on this. So in fact, there wasn't a challenge at the zoning board for this whole thing, and we didn't get sued. That's because we have folks in the Fenway who understand this process and know that if they want affordable housing, one of the things you can't do is parking. The other neighborhoods where this is going on, you don't have such understanding neighbors and abutters, and they do sue just because they don't like what you're doing, and they're going to stop you. The other thing to remember too is that in the case of community development corporations doing affordable housing, we have a tremendous track record of doing housing in transit-rich areas. And that's one of the things we focus on is, as they now call it, transit-oriented development. In most of our properties throughout the city, when I say our community development corporations, residents have the lowest rates of car ownership and the highest rates of using mass transit. And in part because of the exorbitant costs of owning and operating a car and the fact that we're building next to mass transit. So, for all those reasons, we would certainly urge the council to act favorably on docket 0685 and the request to remove the parking variance or requirement on affordable housing in Boston. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I don't think there's any questions, but maybe.
Great, thank you so much, Rich.
Thank you.
All right, I think that reaches the end of folks who I had signed up to testify who are here. So I'll just say quickly that if you are watching at home and you want to get your voice heard and in, you can email Christine, so CHRISTINE.O'Donnell, ODONNELL at boston.gov, Christine.O'Donnell@boston.gov, to get added to the testimony list. I do have one letter to read into the record, so you can shoot us a note quickly. But if you missed that, we're still accepting written testimony, ccc.go@boston.gov. If you watch this afterwards and you want to make your voice heard, please send that our way. I'm going to just quickly read a letter from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, who couldn't join us today but wanted to submit this as testimony. I also would thank the Fenway CDC for their written testimony. I won't read it since Rich joined us in person. And then I'll go before we gavel out just to the councilors who are still here for any closing remarks. So from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, dated October 5th, dear members of the Boston City Council, on behalf of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, I am writing today to express our support for the efforts described in docket 0685 in order regarding a text amendment to the Boston zoning code with respect to parking minimums for affordable housing. MAPC has done significant research on the impacts that parking requirements have on housing affordability, greenhouse gas emissions, and non-auto mobility, and we are pleased to see the city take steps to align parking requirements with demand. Excess parking has real consequences. Property that could be landscaped as common or even public green space is instead paved over as parking. Since car owners prefer to live in buildings with easy parking, providing abundant parking encourages more vehicles on the site, increasing the number of trips and traffic on nearby roads. In neighborhoods that are accessible to an MBTA station, this means fewer people using the available transit, while congestion, pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions rise. Finally, of special concern in the face of Greater Boston's housing supply and affordability crisis, more parking means fewer and more expensive housing units. In 2019, MAPC published Perfect Fit Parking, improving the way developers and planners assess parking demand. As part of this report, MAPC collected overnight off-street parking data at nearly 200 multifamily buildings across the inner core of Metro Boston. While building size and characteristics varied widely, one common theme emerged across all the communities surveyed: off-street residential parking is regularly overbuilt beyond demand. Overall, while average parking supply was exactly 1 space per unit, average parking demand was 0.7 spaces per unit. MAPC staff observed 6,000 vacant parking spaces during peak residential demand times. This amounts to over 41 acres of pavement and an estimated $94.5 million in construction costs. To provide a more robust basis for smart parking policy, MAPC used this data to create a statistical model to determine what building and neighborhood characteristics predict parking demand. After testing 25 different variables, the analysis determined that parking supply was the dominant factor in determining parking demand. Essentially, building ample residential parking is more likely to attract households that own multiple vehicles. Two other factors proved statistically significant in influencing parking demand: as transit accessibility, as measured by the number of jobs accessible by transit, increases, parking demand decreases, and as the share of affordable units increased, parking demand decreased. These trends were evident in our observations. The most transit accessible sites saw an average parking demand of 0.54 spaces per unit, and the 100% affordable sites were observed to have an average parking demand of 0.49 spaces per unit. Reducing or eliminating minimum parking requirements can support more affordable housing development, expand land available for open space, and in the long term, enable development patterns that are more conducive to walking, biking, and riding public transit. Communities like Everett and Somerville have already taken steps to reduce their parking minimums, and we are very supportive of additional Metro Boston communities working to adopt these zoning changes. Thank you for your consideration of these comments. If you have any questions or would like to speak further about this research, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Eric Barassa, Transportation Director for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. So that council is a sort of quasi public planning entity for the whole metro region. And so we appreciate them weighing in on this. All right, I think that's all the public testimony. Christine, have you heard from anybody else who wants to testify?
Sorry, I have not, Councillor.
Okay, great. So I'll remind you again, if you're watching this after the fact, ccc.go@boston.gov is the place to send testimony on this docket. And now I'll just go to my colleagues for closing remarks. So Councillor O'Malley, and then it'll be Councillor Arroyo and Councillor Braden. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for your partnership. Wanted to really just take this opportunity to thank the individuals who took time on this overcast and somewhat blustery Tuesday afternoon to spend an hour plus with us sharing your stories and really, in words far more eloquent than my own, articulating why we need this and why this is an important, thoughtful, and effective piece of legislation and effective zoning change. So I'm just grateful to each and every one of you, many of whom I've worked with in the past. Look forward to getting this done. So thank you all.
Thanks so much, President O'Malley. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you. I want to thank the folks who made public comment today and shared their stories, some very personal. Thank you so much for your bravery and for being on the other side of that and taking the time today to be here and speak on it. And I just want to be clear that I'm going to support pretty much anything that this council does from here until I no longer hold the seat that makes it easier for us to build affordable housing. Anything that makes it easier to do that is something I'll support. If it makes it harder to do that, it's something we'll examine. This, to me, passes the marker of being something that makes it easier to do it. It's not perfect. It's not going to solve all of our affordable housing woes. It's not going to get rid of all of the lawsuits, but it will make it easier for us to create units that real human beings can live in and call home. And I think as somebody who has been blessed to always have a home, that is something that is remarkably important that we have. As a public defender, when I was working with people who are largely destabilized, one of the root causes of destabilization in their lives, whether it was something that aggravated mental health or aggravated substance abuse or led to substance abuse, was houselessness. And so this is something that is incredibly important. And I thank the makers for putting this on the table. I paid it the highest compliment I can pay something, which is I wish I did it. So thank you, both of you, for doing this. I appreciate you both, and I look forward to getting this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Next time, co-sponsorship, but definitely we can start the caucus of all things that make affordable housing easier. All right, Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Councillor O'Malley for your leadership on this issue. It's really, really important. And thank you to everyone who's testified this afternoon. It's really a good piece of work, and I look forward to supporting it when it comes up for a vote in City Council. And thank you so much. Be well and thanks for all your work you do. I know you're all in the trenches every day working for more affordable housing in Boston. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Yeah, and I'll just add my thanks, especially to everybody who testified today. I think it's so important for us to make this personal and recognize, we can sometimes talk about quality of life as a kind of catchphrase, but of course, as I think Joanne really brought home to us, there is nothing more central to quality of life than having a home. And we just have to keep that as our North Star in the city of Boston. And we've got too many people who are living under threat and not having it, or who are living without it right now. And so, I just think, meeting this with the urgency that it requires, I think this is a step that we can take. And I will be working with Chair Edwards to get us to a place where this can be reported out of committee. Certainly, I'll be suggesting that it receive a favorable recommendation and go to the floor of the council. But just really want to thank everybody, all the advocates, and also all the department staff who joined us today, and for your thoughtful work and the technical feedback from the departments. It's all been super helpful, and we will follow up. I'll make sure the committee follows up on that information request we got from Councillor O'Malley, just to make sure that we can kind of give people a sense of the scope and scale here. But I think it's unfortunately, the number of affordable housing projects that the city supports every year is still not so many that we can't name them all, right? And I think the reality is that we can still name them all, and if a portion of them can move through faster, that's a portion of people who are housed more quickly. And I'm very cognizant of knowing that with those 39 units in JP that we've alluded to, that there's, no matter what comes out there, we know we've had at least 6 months of delay in somebody getting into those homes, and that's really real. So I just want to thank everybody for this, and again, thank Councillor Edwards, whose staff has been really helpful on this, and the committee staff, and Carrie, our MVP, who sits behind the scenes and makes the Zooms happen. With that, this hearing on docket 0685, I believe that's right. This hearing of the Government Operations Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.